shut up a perimeter. Bring Bravo team to Point Delta.
Bravo team is go.
Move, move, move.
Let's go, let's go.
Can I help you folks find something?
No!
You may have not heard of the red jungle fowl, an obscure bird native to the tropical bamboo forests of Southeast Asia, but you have definitely heard of its domesticated counterpart, the chicken. Every half-century, bamboo drops an avalanche of seeds, some of which will become the next generation of bamboo stalks, as the old stalks die out. The red jungle fowl, seeing the short-term abundance of food, will get really horny, pumping out eggs non-stop. However, once most of the excess seeds are gone, the population crashes as the large population lacks enough food to sustain itself. And so we have a cycle. Red jungle fowl aren't the only animals which have population cycles. Take a look at lemmings, which breed rapidly during the winter but die off in mass due to predation during the spring and summer. No self-deletions are necessary, contrary to what Disney or folk myths will tell you. Humans saw the cycle in chickens and, I guess to a lesser extent, lemmings, and thought, hey, if we give these animals food non-stop, then they will lay eggs non-stop. And with enough food, we can pump out enough babies at a higher rate ourselves. And as a result of domestication agriculture, today there are 25 to 35 billion chickens that are alive today. Although most of them won't be alive for much longer, as most of them will turn into chicken tendies. During the agricultural revolution, human populations also skyrocketed, as there was an abundance of food. Sure, famines, droughts, wars, and epidemics led to downturns, but humanity was steadily increasing nonetheless. This was not a never-ending boom and bust cycle like lemmings, but rather a long, steady increase of population until you get to the Industrial Revolution with its advent in medicine, farming, and manufacturing. We had a colossal exponential boom at this point in history. Now keep in mind that at this point, many people were starting to raise questions about this population boom. In fact, even before industrialization happened, one man by the name of Thomas Malthus created the quote-unquote Principle of Population essay in 1798, in which he argued that population would outstrip food supply, leading to famine and eventually civil unrest, leading to population decline after a population boom. He proposed that people engage in quote-unquote moral restraint, as in delaying marriage and abstaining from sexual intercourse to decrease the population. Now it turns out that a lot of millennials, and even more so Zoomers, are delaying marriage and copulating less. Will the laws of ecology predict that we will see a bust? Maybe. The bust will not be due to famines this time, or droughts, or wars, or even a shortage of bamboo seeds and chicken tendies. Maybe humans will have a population bust by choice. Not because young people are reading 18th century essays, but because of a wide variety of social, technological, and economic forces. And maybe that makes us more like the fictional portrayal of self-deleting lemmings than the actual lemmings. Now keep in mind that this video is part of a series on potential human extinction events. Unlike all the other scenarios that I point out in the series, the demographic crisis is by far the most voluntary. Keep in mind that the concern over lower birth rates and declining populations has only been a core concern over the past 5, at most 10 years. Throughout much of the previous decades, concern about overpopulation and environmental destruction was a bigger deal. The 21st century has seen a decline in various diseases, infant mortality, war, etc. Pretty much all the other factors that I've talked about in this series about human extinction events have declined in likelihood, yet our birth rates are lower than ever. But sometimes microbes that make you piss pus aren't necessary for depopulation. A lot of people don't want to have kids because they don't like kids. This trend is in spite of what many environmentalists of the 20th century warned about. In 1968, biologist Paul Ehrlich, I don't even know if I'm pronouncing his last name properly, wrote the book The Population Bomb, in which he argued that overpopulation would result in worldwide famines. Keep in mind that this was at a time when the baby boomer generation emerged as the largest generation in American/Western history. Keep in mind the author was not anti-human. If anything, he was arguing that too many people would result in mass suffering, and eventually a massive dip in the number of, well, people. Granted, he was ridiculed for being too alarmist. In other words, without previous natural pressures preventing population growth, a big Thanos snap was bound to happen due to a lack of smaller Thanos snaps. Paul was more fixated on environmental and agricultural factors, but he didn't take into account the Green Revolution, which used new agricultural technology to feed much of the world, particularly in the developing world. Alas, there was no need to save the environment, let alone humanity, through some sort of Thanos snap. It turned out that the opposite is largely true today. In 2019, Daryl Bricker and John Ibbotson wrote and released the book Empty Planet. The premise of the book is that population decline will happen, not due to overpopulation caused by famines and wars, but rather people choosing not to have as many children as they did before. We will get back to these two authors shortly. Speaking of the kids,
fuck them kids.
Let's move on to anti-natalism, which is the belief that is opposed to, well, having children. As the comedian Bill Hicks stated, one of the arguments against having children is that the world oftentimes just sucks. Another argument for anti-natalism is that people can't choose to be born. Yes, the most important event of your entire life, your own existence itself coming into fruition, is something you didn't have a say in. Maybe we could voluntarily cause our own extinction by not breeding babies, after all. The planet might be better off without every woman pumping out another worthless dipshit that turns food into shit.
So don't you realize after your third loser kid, you don't have the DNA to make somebody special?
Granted, anti-natalism has a series of negative ramifications for people and the babies that were born and already grew up. Case in point, Japan. Japan's population is already declining. It is not surprising, their population is aging after all. Why get and start a relationship to get laid when you can bang a hentai body pillow that doesn't get pregnant or nag? Japan has a rapidly aging population with more adult diapers being used than baby diapers. This has made life tougher for working age people who have to take care of a larger and larger number of elderly people who don't work. South Korea is facing an even more severe demographic crisis, in part due to rapid changes in the economy and social relations, particularly due to gender dynamics. The intense work-life culture in these countries makes it difficult to have a work-life balance, let alone a family life. While not as wealthy per capita, China is also facing a population decline in the coming decades. For a long time, China had a one-child policy, but couples only want to have boys to provide for them when they grow old and crusty, so their population is going to be really old and mostly male. Needless to say, China will not be the best place to get pussy in the future. The large number of young men without the prospect of having a partner and a family may result in civil unrest. When a young man has a wife and children to take care of, he has people to live for. But when he doesn't have anything to lose and nothing to live for, he may burn down the village to feel his warmth. On top of that, many East Asian countries don't bring in immigrants to any large degree in order to increase birth rates. This homogeneity does keep high-trust societies intact, but it exacerbates their aging populations. The primary solution East Asian nations are banking on is automation. Through the use of AI and robotics, dirty, boring, and dangerous menial work with low pay will be filled up by machines. This will mitigate the shrinking populations of young people, but it could also cause unrest with younger populations who lack the skill set to get more advanced jobs. Historian Yuval Noah Harari spoke of a new quote-unquote useless class.
Creation of a new massive class of useless people. As computers become better and better in more and more fields, computers will outperform us in most tasks and will make humans redundant.
In order to quell potential unrest, society might placate this segment of the population with video games, Cornhub, and a lifetime supply of Doritos and Mountain Dew. Europe is facing a similar demographic crisis. Like East Asia, Europe is wealthy, educated, and secular, all of which are correlated with lower birth rates. Most European countries also have strong social safety nets, which, while producing very high quality life, do face serious challenges as populations age. Retirement plans and healthcare costs will balloon in decades to come, as a smaller percentage of working adults will have to support a growing number of old people. Without enough people in their 20s and 50s contributing to economic production, how will old people have enough medication and prunes? However, European countries have focused less on automation, as their tech sector is a joke compared to East Asia and their American counterparts. Instead, they have focused on immigration as a method of increasing their populations and birth rates. However, this has led to significant controversy over cultural clashes, particularly with immigrants from the Muslim world. The importation of traditional religious communities into secular post-Christian societies has led to lower levels of societal trust. Some countries like Sweden, Germany, and the UK have brought in large swaths of these immigrants, which has led to the rise of right-wing populist factions. Other countries, namely Eastern European nations, have closed off most of their borders. Poland, a fairly religious and conservative country with low immigration, has a birth rate of 1.1. Most European countries have birth rates similar to this. Keep in mind that the replacement rate is 2.1 children per woman. This is because women are half the population, so each woman needs to give birth to at least 2.1 children to keep the population at a replacement level. Because more and more women are not having children, those who do must pump out more diaper factories than usual. Across the pond is, of course, North America. Both the US and Canada have birth rates below replacement levels. However, this probably won't be as much of an issue in this part of the world as it is in Europe or East Asia, as these immigrant-based nations are better adapted at assimilating migrants. This will change the demographic makeup, as many of the immigrants are from Asia and Latin America. Speaking of Latin America, despite being part of the developing world, many of these countries have birth rates below replacement levels, such as Brazil, which is 1.5, and Colombia, which is 1.7. This places them in a perilous position, as they are aging but lack the homegrown advanced technology for automation, and they're not as coveted as a source for immigrants as, say, many countries in Europe. Granted, some of the poorer countries like Bolivia have birth rates above replacement level. On the other side of the Pacific, you have Australia and New Zealand, which, like most other advanced economies, are below replacement level. Meanwhile, birth rates in the Middle East are varied, with wealthy Gulf states at or below replacement levels. At the same time, some of the poorer, more unstable Arab nations like Iraq have birth rates like 3.3. Israel, on the other hand, is the one exception of the developed world, with birth rates of 2.9, the only rich country in the world with a strong birth rate. Birth rates are high for both Orthodox Jews as well as secular Jews. The primary reason is cultural. Jewish Israeli culture places a strong emphasis on getting young people to get married early and have children, as high birth rates mean that they won't be outnumbered by both the Arab Israeli population, which makes up a fifth of the national population, as well as Arabs in the Palestinian territories. Pronatalism is seen as a form of group preservation. Keep in mind that natalist cultures and ideologies last longer, as they pass on their memes along with their genes to the next generation directly. So even if some population segments decline, in the long run, the breeders will prevail. Moving eastward is the Indian subcontinent, which has seen a great deal of birth rates decline as well, with Bangladesh being the most stark. This is happening as the country is rapidly getting wealthier and more urbanized. The one region which still has a massive birth rate increase is Sub-Saharan Africa. A large swath of people in Sub-Saharan Africa still rely on subsistence agriculture, in which they produce their own food rather than produce enough food to sell on the market and become commercial farmers. Having commercial farming rather than subsistence farming leads to a diversification of labor, which means that people move into the cities and have less kids. In the aforementioned book, Empty Planet, the authors point out that in rural communities which rely on subsistence agriculture, having children is an asset. Little Jafari waters the crops and cleans up the goat shit. But when you live in cities, kids are a liability. They cost a lot of money, don't work, become fat, and don't appreciate anything. Your son Jacob can do something more useful than inhale nachos and play video games, but he chooses not to. The kids in an African village, on the other hand, labor away producing crops and only require gruel and some guinea worm water in return. Having a kid in suburban Cleveland, or even Nairobi for that matter, just results in a little shit that consumes food, money, time, and only produces shit, piss, and complaints in return. If you live in a city and a rich country, you can get a cat instead. Unlike toddlers, they take their dumps in one place and never stick their paws in the electrical sockets. Granted, these African countries are not prepared for large-scale population growth. See, before, famines, wars, droughts, and most of all disease kept African populations in check. However, with better access to vaccines, medicine, mosquito nets, water filters, fertilizer, pesticides, etc., that lead to a decrease in the infant mortality rate. This is great. Until you realize that the rising massive populations cannot be sustained by the poor infrastructure of these nations. This can lead to mass civil unrest, famine, and potentially a migrant crisis that will hit Europe and the Middle East. The future will be composed of rich countries which can and need more people to function, while the poorest nations have tons of people they cannot sustain. Perhaps emigration from Africa will be a lot more common, but this will result in increased nativism, a decrease in societal trust, and it will be difficult for many of these new migrants to integrate with their new societies. Now, this leads us to the question, why are rich countries not producing children? One explanation is women in the public sphere, along with birth control. Women getting education and jobs decreases the birth rate. When little girls get asked what they want to be when they grow up, their career plan usually doesn't involve getting knocked up before prom night. Education and careers for women means delaying childbirth, and the pill during the 1960s separated sex from having children. And if they are too stupid to use a condom, some will opt for an abortion and turn their fetus into a scrambled egg. Some women getting access to contraception is arguably the biggest factor in the decline of birth rates. They can ride as many dongs as they want without getting preggo. Before, it was hard for a woman to get laid without having to feed a mouth for nearly 2 fucking decades. Today, she can squirt on as many dongs as she wants without pushing out a cat-sized human from her snatch. Today, the dating market looks a lot more bleak than it did during the traditional 1950s, as well as the free love of the 1960s. The rise of dating apps has led to dating market failure, in which a small percentage of men get nearly all the matches from women. This means that there are more and more young men who don't have access to partners, intimacy, love, or sex, hence incels. Meanwhile, there are a large number of young women who are chasing after a small strata of men who, in the vast majority of cases, they will not be able to marry, as there's just way too much competition. As these women age, chasing after an idealized partner rather than settling down for a more realistic prospect, many will end up being spinsters and cat ladies. On top of that, there's also the affordability crisis, particularly in the realm of housing. However, I do believe that economic factors are overstated. After all, the poorest people are still having lots of kids. On top of that, very rich people are also having a lot of kids. An African woman living in a village in Zambia has plenty of kids, as does another African by the name of Elon Musk. Meanwhile, middle-class people in fairly rich countries, or at the very least medium-income countries, are having less and less kids than ever before. We essentially have a U-curve. Speaking of both cultural and economic matters, people are very career-oriented today. They are too consumed being in an office and not consumed enough with getting any ass. Raising a family sucks. People are busy with more meaningful activities like working with Microsoft Excel. Hobbies, travel, and other life pursuits are also playing a role as alternative forms of purpose, meaning, and at the very least, killing time. Traveling to Bali or mastering tennis or model trains is a lot more fun than changing diapers. Aside from babies, another group of people that oftentimes suck up society's resources and produce nothing but diapers are old people. In the past, there were wise village elders. If I want to hear some wisdom today, however, I can look up things on Google. It provides me with information and doesn't get dementia. So, a lot of cultures today are like, old people, you aren't working anymore and you're just sucking up all the resources. Can you just, like, die already? There are primitive tribes that migrate and have limited resources, and they eventually abandon the elderly. It's hard to be grandpa and get him to migrate after the herds of antelope when he has to bring his kidney dialysis with him. Modern societies can perhaps learn from these more traditional societies, although it would be extremely controversial. Some have claimed that we must engage in euthanasia, a highly controversial practice of ending old people's lives a little bit younger than usual. Maybe we can herd old people into a bingo game at the Country Kitchen Buffet, close the door, and slowly spew carbon monoxide into the restaurant. That way they can die doing something they loved. Now, to be clear, I am joking, but make no mistake, this increase of elderly people will lead to a burden on healthcare, social safety nets, and social security. Social democracies produce the best everyday life outcomes, but they need functioning demographics to support their structures. So, with more old people burdening the healthcare systems and consuming all the applesauce and less young people shitting out babies, we have a shrinking labor force. Now, one good thing about old people is that they don't fight wars, so less people die in combat, further depopulating the planet, or in this case, not depopulating the planet. An old planet might be a more peaceful planet. Granted, I do want to see an army of grandpas fight each other with their walking sticks. As stated before, one of the two ways to deal with an anti-natalist culture is immigration. If white people or people in rich countries in general don't have babies, that means you can import some horny brown people. But within a generation or two, even the horny brown immigrants in rich countries don't want to have kids. They're subject to the same cultural, economic, and societal factors. This will lead to lower trust levels until the population gets used to the demographic change of being more diverse, in which the trust levels probably rebound. Automation and robotics are another method. So far, AI has been really good at taking over clerical work. Robots have been very good at taking over some manufacturing jobs, namely in the automotive industry. However, it is a long way away from taking over most menial jobs. For now, at least we have some vacuum robots, so I guess that's good if you have a dog that sheds a lot like I do. Keep in mind that automation will be a major factor in mitigating some of the costs of the population crisis. After all, Instagram outcompeted Kodak. At its peak, Kodak had 130,000 employees, while Instagram was bought by Facebook when it only had a grand total of 13 employees. Today, Kodak has a little less than 4,000 employees, with a fraction of the relevance or economic power of Instagram, let alone its current owner, Facebook. So maybe with tech, population decline won't be that big of an issue. The rise of automation can assuage the population decline, however, it may lead to unemployment and a loss of purpose for a large segment of the population. Humanity's population will peak at around 10.5 billion people by the end of this century, followed by a worldwide decline if the projection stays the same, and that is an if. Perhaps a temporary dip will probably be a good thing in the long run as it mitigates pressure on the environment, as well as our infrastructure and institutions. Maybe culture will shift in a more pro-natalist direction. Perhaps cultures in the developed world will shift back to a quasi-traditional set of gender roles in order to promote higher birth rates. What I could also see is not so much an extinction due to a lack of breeding, but rather an ecological cycle similar to lemmings but on a longer scale. One of rapid booms followed by busts, and then booms and busts and booms and busts ad infinitum. Extinction need not be necessary. Thanks for watching.